Welcome to English Podcast for English Learners, the show that takes your English skills from lost tourist to confident explorer. I'm John, your guide for today's adventure.
And I'm Jessica, here to help you navigate the ins and outs of asking for and giving directions in English.
And hey, before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button like this episode and share it with your friends. We've got tons more deep dives into fascinating English language topics coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, let's set the scene. Imagine you're in a vibrant new city, excited to soak in all the sights, but there's a catch. You're completely lost.
Oh, no.
Don't worry, we've all been there. That's why we're diving deep into excerpts from a guide on giving directions to equip you with the skills to confidently ask for directions and give them no matter where you find yourself.
Exactly. We're going to decode those essential phrases and strategies that'll make you a master navigator.
In no time. First up, let's tackle those moments when you are the one who's lost. How do you ask for directions like a pro? What are those key phrases that can help you out?
Well, even when you're feeling flustered, politeness is key. Starting with a simple "excuse me" goes a long way. Then you can follow it up with something direct like, how do I get to, and then the place, for example, "excuse me, how do I get to the nearest bank?"
Yeah, that's a classic. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you didn't quite catch the directions. I know I get nervous and sometimes my brain freezes up.
Oh, yeah.
Could you repeat that, please? Or even could you speak a bit slower? Our lifesavers?
Absolutely. It's also helpful to confirm your understanding by rephrasing the directions. You could say, okay, so if I walk straight ahead for 2 blocks and turn left at the bookstore, I'll be there, right? This shows you're actively listening and helps avoid misunderstandings.
That's such a good tip. Repeating it back in your own words is like a safety net. It really helps to make sure you're on the right track. You know, something I always try to ask is it far from here? It gives you a sense of whether you can walk it or if you need to consider hopping on a bus or calling a taxi.
That's smart. It helps you gauge the situation and plan your next move. Sometimes knowing the distance can make all the difference.
Okay, so we've nailed down the art of asking for directions. Now let's flip the script. Let's say you're the one who's approached by a lost soul. How do you give directions that are crystal clear and easy to follow?
Well, I've got to admit, I've had my fair share of direction-giving disasters. I once sent a friend on a wild goose chase because I mixed up east and west.
I feel you. I've done that too. It's easy to get flustered when someone's looking to you for guidance, but there are definitely ways to make it smoother. What are your top tips for giving foolproof directions?
First and foremost, clarity is king. Start with a simple instruction like go straight ahead and then build from there.
Okay, go straight ahead. Got it. But what about those situations where there are multiple streets and turns? How do you make sure the person doesn't get lost along the way?
That's where landmarks come in handy. Instead of saying turn left at the 3rd street, try turn left at the big red church. Landmarks are visual cues that are much easier to remember than street names alone.
Landmarks, those are lifesavers. And don't forget to mention the distance, like walk past the park for about 2 blocks and you'll see the bakery on your right.
Exactly. Providing those extra details helps paint a clearer picture in the listener's mind. And while we're on the topic of details, those little prepositions are your secret weapon.
Oh.
Next to opposite in front of these, help create a mental map for the person following your directions.
Right, it's like you're painting a picture with words. And hey, before we move on, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button like this episode and share it with your friends. We want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our future deep dives into the fascinating world of English. Now back to those all-important prepositions. What are some examples of how they come in handy when giving directions?
Well, let's say the person is looking for a coffee shop. You could say, the coffee shop is right next to the bookstore across the street from the park. Those prepositions provide crucial context and make the directions much easier to visualize.
Makes perfect sense. It's all about providing those little clues that help the person connect the dots and find their way.
Exactly. And don't forget to check in with the person to make sure they understand. You can ask, does that make sense? Or do you see what I'm saying?
It's a two-way street. You're not just giving directions. You're also engaging in a mini conversation to make sure the information is getting across clearly.
Absolutely. It's about ensuring that the person feels confident and comfortable following your guidance.
So we've covered the basics of clear language and landmarks. But what about vocabulary? Are there specific words that people should brush up on when it comes to asking for and giving directions? Like beyond street and turn, what else is essential?
Absolutely. Think about the places tourists typically look for: post office, museum, park, hospital, bank, mall. Those are good ones to have in back pocket.
Oh, and let's not forget about transportation. Sometimes walking isn't an option, especially in a sprawling city. Words like bus, taxi, subway, train station, those are crucial for navigating public transportation.
Very true. And while we're talking about transportation, understanding common road signs is important too. Stop sign, traffic lights, roundabout, crossroads, junction, these are all signs you might encounter on your journey.
Oh man, roundabouts? Those used to be my nemesis. I once spent a good 10 minutes circling one in London before figuring out my exits, with like a traffic circle on steroids.
I can imagine they can be a bit intimidating at first, but once you get the hang of them, they're actually quite efficient.
Speaking of getting the hang of things, I remember struggling with the word junction for the longest time. But still, it is a junction anyway.
A junction is simply a point where two or more roads meet. Think of it like an intersection where you have different options for which way to go.
That makes sense. It's one of those words that sounds way more complicated than it actually is.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to break down these vocabulary terms and make sure we're all on the same page.
Absolutely. Now, our guide has some really helpful example conversations that show how all these elements, the phrases, the landmarks, the prepositions, come together in real-life scenarios. Let's take a look at one. Okay, this one says, tourist. Excuse me, could you tell me how to get to the National Museum? Local. Sure. Go straight ahead for 2 blocks. You'll see a large fountain on your left. Turn left there, and the museum will be on your right across from the park.
Perfect. That's a great example of clear and concise directions. It uses a landmark, the fountain, a clear directional instruction, turn left distance 2 blocks, and a preposition across from to give the tourist a complete picture of the route.
I like how it even reassures the tourist by telling them the museum will be on their right. Little details like that can make a big difference, especially when you're in an unfamiliar place.
They really can. It's all about making the person feel confident and comfortable following your instructions.
You know, it's funny how something as simple as asking for or giving directions can sometimes feel like a high-pressure situation, especially when you're trying to do it in a second language.
I know exactly what you mean. My heart used to race whenever I had to ask for directions in a foreign country. But you know what? Even if you stumble over your words or make a little mistake, it's not the end of the world. People are generally understanding, especially when they see you're making an effort.
That's so true, and most people are happy to help. In fact, I've found that asking for directions can often lead to interesting conversations and unexpected connections.
Absolutely. It's a great way to break the ice and engage with locals. It can turn a potentially stressful situation into a positive experience.
Speaking of positive experiences, don't forget to hit that subscribe button like this episode and share it with your friends. We're passionate about making English learning fun and accessible, and we'd love for you to join our community of learners. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. The magic of connecting with others through the simple act of asking for directions. Have you ever had a particularly memorable experience where asking for directions led to something unexpected? You know what? You're so right. It's amazing how asking for directions can sometimes lead to those unexpected little adventures. It reminds me of a time when I was traveling solo in Italy. I was completely lost trying to find this tiny little trattoria tucked away in a back alley. I finally worked up the courage to ask a local for directions. And not only did he point me in the right direction, but he also insisted on walking me there himself. We ended up chatting the whole way, and I learned so much about the neighborhood, the history, and even a few Italian phrases.
That's so cool. It just goes to show that stepping outside of your comfort zone and engaging with others can lead to the most enriching experiences. It's those unexpected encounters that often become the most memorable parts of our journeys.
Absolutely. It's like those moments when you get lost actually end up leading you somewhere even better than you originally planned.
Exactly. And sometimes those unexpected detours can teach us so much more than just how to get from point A to point B. They can open our eyes to new perspectives, new cultures, the new ways of seeing the world.
So I guess the takeaway here is don't be afraid to get a little lost. Embrace the opportunity to ask for help, connect with others, and maybe even discover a hidden gem or two along the way.
I love that.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the nuances of asking for and giving directions, delved into essential vocabulary, and even shared a few personal anecdotes about the power of connecting with others when we're feeling a little lost.
It's been a fantastic discussion, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to navigate the English-speaking world with confidence.
Me too. And hey, before we wrap up, one last reminder to hit that subscribe button like this episode and share with your friends. We're passionate about helping you master English, and we've got so much more in store for you.
So much more.
Thanks for joining us today on English Podcast for English Learners. Until next time, happy exploring.